Hello and welcome to the Henley and Partners Global Mobility Report webcast series. I'm Juliet Foster and I'm delighted to be your host and the moderator for this prestigious series of exclusive interviews with leading international academics and professional experts on the major and emerging trends in global and regional mobility. Grounded in geopolitical analysis with a focus on the realities shaping our world, from COVID-19 to climate change to economic downturn and ongoing conflict, the Global Mobility Report series offers exclusive insight into mobility and migration patterns and looks at what we can expect in the months to come. Well, joining me today to discuss the anticipated investment migration trends for the coming year is Dr. Jörg Steffen, who is the CEO of Henley and Partners, and Dominik Volek, who's the firm's group head of private clients, and he's also a member of the executive committee. So big warm welcome to both of you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Juliet.
Thank you.
Great. Excellent. It's good to see you both. And Jörg, please let me start with you, because how would you describe the impact of COVID-19 on the appeal of investment migration that we've seen over the past year?
Thank you, Juliet. So we saw actually a very big impact. It was a difficult year for us. In the first months of COVID, our turnover dropped a lot by up to 70%. And the reason we see in that is that this was, of course, a very new environment for all of us. We had a complete lockdown in many regions around the world. And people just felt insecure and didn't know what is coming. And so, another problem was that with regard to the application process for these residence and citizenship programs, the clients that we had, they couldn't proceed. So they couldn't go to the notaries, they couldn't go to the governments, the government offices were closed. But then, interestingly, once the first lockdown were over in many regions, then we saw a huge demand. So as of June, we had much more demand and also much more clients than in the years before. I would say we had an increase of around 100 to 200%, in some regions, even 300%. And the appeal, so your question was why do we see this appeal in investment migration because of COVID? So this is, I think, very clear. People realized in the lockdown that they are stuck. They are stuck to the country where they live, where they have a resident permit or citizenship. And some of them probably wanted to move somewhere, had the means to move somewhere, but they just couldn't because the borders were closed and they couldn't apply for resident permits or for citizenship in other countries. And so they realized in this difficult COVID time how important it is to have options and how important it is to have other residence and citizenship. And therefore, afterwards in the Q3 and 4 of last year, we saw a lot of demand and all our staff globally were very, very busy.
Sure. And Dom, this is playing out at your end of the operation. So let's stay with this, because in terms of the inquiries, have they been primarily from citizens in emerging economies, or has there been an increase in interest from investors in developed countries? Is it as clear cut as that?
Yeah, I mean, this has been the incredible, interesting sort of phenomenon that we've seen since COVID came along. So the investment migration industry is typically driven by emerging economies, certain push factors from those. But what we've seen now coming out, we're not coming out of the pandemic, we're still a lot of us are in the pandemic, but what we have seen is a significant spike in interest from developed countries. And in the last sort of, I would say, 3 to 6 months, some of the biggest interest we've seen have been out of the US, Canada, and the UK. So that's been probably the most interesting thing from my perspective, is the numbers that we now see in the inquiries we have from high net worth families in those 3 countries particularly, and their interest in maybe some of the, maybe the non-traditional markets. New Zealand has really come along now in terms of a destination for these clients from more developed nations, looking at New Zealand, Australia, and islands in general. If you're on an island in a pandemic scenario, it's something you can control much better. You can close the borders and you can maintain the relatively small populations within them.
So, Jörg, given all those factors, what, in your opinion, are the key benefits of investment migration for today's investors? What do they get out of it?
So it depends a lot on the programs that they're looking at, and so we have on the citizenship side, we have the Caribbean citizenship programs and Montenegro, and these are the traditional programs and how the citizenship by investment industry started. And as we heard before from from Dominic Wolek, the traditional clients doing these programs were sitting in emerging markets and were looking for a way how they can travel more easily around the world. So as you know, with some passports, you can travel to many countries without a visa. And to other countries, with other passports, you are more restricted because the visa-free travel is not as good as with other passports. And so these clients traditionally, they were looking for passports with whom they can travel to many countries visa-free. But now, because of the COVID, this changed quite heavily. So now, as we also heard before from Dominic, now we see also in the developed markets, we see a huge interest because clients see that when they just have one residence or citizenship, then this is a big risk for them. And often these are skilled investors, and they know that you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket, and you should diversify. And they realize that the same is also right and is also true for residents and citizenships. And therefore we see now after COVID such a big demand from completely new markets.
Yeah, it's interesting how they're actually interpreting the concept of diversification, because we normally apply it to finance, and now they're applying it to the idea of actually having this multiple citizenship via the passports. But Dom, we're having this conversation against this backdrop of a pandemic, but do you think that COVID-19 itself is likely to trigger an increase in the range of available investment migration programs and offerings that are available worldwide? I'm not saying we're going to see a supermarket, but do you think that there's going to be more choice?
Yeah, I have no doubt. I mean, the last few minutes we've really been focusing on the demand side of the industry, and I certainly see the supply side increasing, and particularly in response to the pandemic. A lot of governments around the world have had to, dig into their reserves, whether they're emerging markets or developed countries. They've had to dig into those reserves in terms of various sort of, initiatives that they've had to do due to the pandemic, whether it's SME loans, job support schemes. And these programs, these investment migration programs, really create what the term we've coined is sovereign equity. And so there's significant foreign direct investment that's available to governments through innovative ideas like developing, designing, and implementing these investment migration programs. So we've got quite a significant government advisory team who's talking to many governments at the moment that are either looking at enhancing what they have to even realize further benefits, or introducing grassroots new programs that will attract this foreign direct investment to help them through what will be a difficult time for years to come.
And let's take a look at the overview, Jörg, because if you go back into the past, the assumption was that investment migration, it was a niche industry, and it was associated with improving ease of travel, or indeed acquiring a vacation home or several vacation homes if that's what you wanted. But do you think that perception has now changed?
Yes, clearly we see that. And actually what you said before, Juliet, about diversification, this is a very interesting concept, and I would like to try to explain it with this diversification concept that we know, of course, from the investment side. And so, in the past, for example, in the US, you were in the 60s, you were living in the US, you were an entrepreneur, you made a wealth, and then you thought, how shall I invest it now? And then in the 60s, I would say all the Americans, or 95%, for sure invested mainly in the US market, because they never actually saw this is a big market, and also from a currency risk perspective, it makes sense, and they mainly invested in the US market. But now, if you talk to the high net worth individuals in the US and in any region in the world, it is clear that they invest globally, very diversified in different asset classes. So they have bonds, they have shares, they have real estate, they have commodities. That's just normal to reduce with this diversification the risk. And then, of course, as I said, regional, but also with asset classes. So that you learn in the first semester at university if you study economy. And this is given today and the way how you invest traditionally. But the interesting thing, what is now changing is when you are an investor, you were standing or sitting in a country and you invested in different asset classes around the world, globally. And now what is changing is that the investors ask themselves, in the country where I stand currently, is that actually the right place to stand? Because of course it could also be a risk. So it's you can diversify the risk where you're investing and in what kind of asset class you're investing. But of course, at the same time, you also have to ask yourself, is actually the place where I am, is this the right place? Or should I try to also diversify this risk and try to get other residencies and other citizenship? Not that I want to move now or have to move, but that I am prepared, or my children in the next generation, that they are prepared when they have to move and when things are changing, when the economy are changing, then they have the ability to do that.
Okay, and I'd like to put the final question to Don, because look, so much is happening. And given that, do you think we're going to see significant growth over the coming year? And if so, where do you think it's going to come from?
Yeah, it's a great question, particularly the second part of that. So without a doubt, we'll see significant growth because the emerging markets will continue, and we can see that the demand continues to grow significantly there. And as I said earlier, now you have the developed markets, particularly the US, coming to the party as well. So I think no doubt there. And another interesting thing we see now is a lot of clients are also starting to do more than one program that is available. So coming back to Jörg's comments on diversification, assuming you're allowed, dual citizenship or multi-citizenship and multi-residence, we now see a lot of clients sort of opting for the sort of Henley combo, and so they will do an Australian residence with a European citizenship, or a Montenegro citizenship with a Portugal golden residence, or a Caribbean with a Singapore mix. And so I think that's quite an interesting thing. So it's not only in terms of the quantum of the number of clients, but the actual number of programs that each client is opting for is something else that will add to the growth which we anticipate going forward.
Gentlemen, we have to leave it there, but thank you both for sharing your valuable insights on the latest trends in investment migration. And also thank you to our global online audience for your engagement and your participation in the Henley and Partners Global Mobility Report series.